Big Shaq was helping his mother when a racist woman accused him of stealing her Amazon package. No proof, just prejudice. But what happened next shook the entire neighborhood. Because when you try to frame Big Shaq, the truth doesn't just fight back, it goes viral. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun spilled over the rooftops like warm syrup, crawling slowly across the picket fences, climbing tree trunks, and landing gently on the sidewalk of Alabaster Lane, a cul-de-sac that sold itself on being quiet, clean, and family-friendly, a place where the birds seemed to chirp on cue, where lawns stayed trimmed to regulation height, and trash cans disappeared like clockwork by noon. But beneath that morning gloss, something less polished stirred. Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal stood barefoot on the wraparound porch of his mother's modest brick house. Hose in hand, he sprayed a gentle arc of water across the whitewashed steps, humming an old Sam Cooke tune that bounced faintly in the morning air. A pair of local squirrels raced across the sidewalk, unbothered by the former NBA legend towering above them. The quiet hum of his deep voice, casual in its rhythm, marked his presence more than the sight of him. Shaq could have stayed in LA or Miami. He could have flown his mom to a mansion on a hill with views of the coastline. But there was something grounding about this Georgia street. Something honest. And honesty these days felt rare. Lucille O'Neal sat just inside the screen door, sipping her tea and flipping slowly through the church bulletin. Her son's visits always brought a hush to the neighborhood. Part awe, part confusion. He didn't drive in with a cavalcade, didn't dress flash, just a soft gray hoodie, cargo shorts, and slides that could have doubled as car bumpers. As Shaq rinsed off the final step, a garage door up the street creaked open. Across the cul-de-sac, lace curtains shifted just enough to catch movement. Old man Rafferty from house number 8, one of the long-timers, gave a subtle wave from his driveway. A seen-you wave, not quite friendly but not unfriendly either. It wasn't the kind of street that welcomed change. And yet change had come. A moving truck had arrived 2 days earlier, at house number 6, the once empty colonial, 2-story now claimed by Priscilla Vaughn. She was a woman wrapped too tightly in her own rules. Early 50s, platinum blonde bob, and an energy that moved like the snap of a rubber band. Her clothes were sharp, her words sharper. She was the kind of person who memorized the HOA handbook and printed extra copies for the neighbors. Unsolicited, of course. Shaq had offered to help when he saw her struggling with a large box marked glass, fragile, coming off the truck ramp. He barely got out the word ma'am before she stiffened and told him plainly, "That's not necessary. I've hired professionals." The professionals, for the record, were a pair of high schoolers from 2 streets over, sweating bullets in rented polo shirts. Since that brief exchange, she hadn't said another word to him. But she looked, watched, studied. Today she appeared at her front door, just as Shaq turned off the hose and leaned it back on its holder. She wore a perfectly ironed powder blue blouse, beige slacks, and a glare that could cut concrete. Her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't speak, just narrowed her eyes as if she were trying to identify a strange bug on her windowsill. Shaq nodded in her direction, polite but detached. He wasn't new to this kind of gaze. Not overtly rude, just tightly wound judgment, dressed as concern. The breeze stirred. Wind chimes twinkled from the porch of house number 4, where Marge Delaney, a widow with an obsession for hummingbirds, sat rocking slowly, eyeing the silent tension brewing across the street. She raised an eyebrow, muttered to herself, and continued knitting something purple and unnecessarily fuzzy. Back on the porch, Lucille looked up from her bulletin. "She's wound up like a church clock," she said softly, not needing to say more. Shaq exhaled through his nose. He had lived through louder battles, more obvious racism, more dangerous situations than a woman with crossed arms, and too much time. But even the soft forms of prejudice could wear down a man's edges. Around 11:30 a.m., the Amazon truck rolled into the cul-de-sac. Like clockwork, it stopped outside number 6. The driver, a skinny man with dreads and mirrored sunglasses, jogged to Priscilla's porch and set a medium-sized box on the welcome mat. A second package was placed on the porch across the street, house number 9. As the truck pulled off, the box at Priscilla's door teetered in the breeze. One strong gust, and it would be tumbling down the steps. Shaq stood at his mom's mailbox, flipping through flyers and coupon books. He saw it wobble. For a second, he debated whether to ignore it. But that wasn't who he was. He walked over, calm, measured, picked up the box with both hands and gently placed it closer to the door, tucked just under the lip of the awning. It wasn't an act of heroism. It was just something a decent neighbor did. But as he turned to walk away, the air changed. A voice shot through the air, like a whip. "Hey!" He turned. Priscilla stood at the top step, eyes wide, phone in hand. "What do you think you're doing with my package?" The cul-de-sac froze. From the corner house, Dean Miller, a retired accountant with a drinking problem and a police scanner, stepped onto his lawn. Marge stopped rocking. A jogger paused mid-stride, earbuds dangling. Shaq blinked, took a half step back. "Just moved it out of the wind," he said, voice even. But her phone was already up, the camera blinking red. "That's theft," she said. "I saw you take it. I'm calling the police." There was no shouting match, no curse words, just disbelief, cold and sharp. Shaq raised his hands slightly, then lowered them. "Call them," he said, already walking away. Lucille stood now too, arms folded, not moving to interfere. She knew her son. It didn't take long. Sirens are fast when you're in the right zip code. 2 officers, one younger, one older. They approached cautiously but not aggressively. Recognition flickered in their eyes before they even reached him. "Big Shaq?" the younger one asked, stunned. "As in, the Big Shaq?" The moment cracked. Priscilla blinked, confused. "You know him?" she asked, voice tight. The officers traded a glance. "Ma'am, this man has done more for this state than half the names on your voting ballot," the older one said calmly. Her mouth opened, but no words came. They reviewed the situation, which took all of 2 minutes. No crime, no intent, just a man being decent. Priscilla lowered her phone, red creeping up her cheeks. Shaq didn't gloat, didn't grin. He just said, "Make sure it doesn't blow away next time," and walked back to the porch. The officers shook his hand. The younger one asked for a selfie, grinning. The cul-de-sac returned to a simmer. But something had shifted. Marge Delaney, still rocking, offered Shaq a gentle 2-finger salute. Across the street, a small boy waved shyly from behind a screen door. Shaq nodded back, heart steady, but mind aware. Because in this kind of place, sometimes the real storm wasn't thunder. It was the silence that followed. The afternoon rolled in with a hush, that kind of humid stillness that told you rain was thinking about falling, but hadn't quite made up its mind. Thunderclouds flirted at the edge of the sky like trouble watching from the wings. Alabaster Lane had slipped into its usual post-lunch rhythm, air conditioners humming, sprinklers ticking, and the occasional bark from behind a tall wooden fence. The kind of afternoon where nothing should happen, but something did. Shaq was trimming the hedge lining Lucille's walkway, quiet and methodical. A faint sheen of sweat on his brow, and a pair of oversized gardening gloves on his hands. The clippers clicked like a metronome, one of those domestic rhythms that made a person feel rooted. It was his way of staying grounded. The kind of work you could finish and point to and say, "I did that today." No crowd, no camera, just clippers and calm. A few doors down, a tan Amazon van rolled into the cul-de-sac. It crept like a cat across the curve, pausing briefly at each address. The driver, a young woman with mirrored shades and a ponytail tucked under a cap, placed a handful of packages across a few porches. One landed on the stoop of house number 7, a slim white box marked electronics. It sat unbalanced at the edge, half its body dangling just past the brick lip. The moment she drove off, a breeze swept through, nudging the box in a nervous little dance. Shaq watched it from the corner of his eye as he clipped the final hedge. The wind picked up slightly, ruffling the bushes and nudging the box again, more insistent now. He paused. It wasn't his house, wasn't his problem, but he knew that rain was close. A few drops had already dotted the edge of the walkway. It didn't sit right, the thought of something important getting ruined when a simple act could fix it. So he stepped across the street, not rushed, not suspicious, just calm, deliberate steps in broad daylight. He climbed the 3 steps of house number 7 and reached for the package with both hands, careful not to disturb the welcome mat beneath it. He turned slightly, about to tuck it under the bench just beside the doorframe. A small kindness. That was when the voice hit him. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" It was sharp, shrill, accusatory. The sound of certainty soaked in suspicion. Shaq turned, package still in hand, and there she was, Priscilla Vaughn, arms crossed, lips pursed so tightly they might have been glued shut if not for the words she was spitting. She stood at the edge of her lawn in an aggressive stance, cell phone already halfway raised. "That's not your house," she snapped. "I saw you. You were about to walk off with that package, weren't you?" Shaq blinked once, slowly, then looked down at the box in his hands. He hadn't moved an inch from the porch, just keeping it from falling in the rain. He said, voice as even as a sermon, but the storm wasn't in the sky anymore. It was in her. "You expect me to believe that?" She barked. "Put it down. Step back. I'm calling the police." A screen door creaked somewhere behind her. Two windows shifted as curtains twitched. Eyes, watching. But no voices. No support. Not a single soul said a word. No one asked questions. They just recorded. Shaq could feel it. The quiet hum of camera lenses behind their blinds. The suspicion wasn't hers alone. It had grown legs and walked into their homes. Priscilla's phone was already up, filming now. Caught in the act, she said to no one. And everyone at once. "Stealing mail. You're going to jail, mister. You don't belong here." The words echoed. Nasty and clean. Shaq placed the box down gently on the porch, precisely where it had been. Then he stepped down, slowly, like a man walking across a frozen lake. "Ma'am, this isn't your house," he said quietly. "This belongs to the Whitmans. They're out of town." "I was just..." "Liar," she snapped. "I saw you. You picked it up like you were about to take off. What else have you taken? You think because you're big and famous you can do what you want." There it was. She knew exactly who he was. Shaq looked around. The silence was suffocating now. The boy from house number 9 was halfway behind a porch post, phone in hand. Across the street, Marge Delaney had stopped knitting mid-stitch. Her mouth slapped. Then, the sirens. Two black and whites rolled into the cul-de-sac like predators in a clearing. Flashing lights, not blaring, but visible. The neighborhood shifted, heads tilted, doors cracked. Two officers stepped out, one older, square-jawed with a clipboard, the other younger, eyes darting from Shaq to Priscilla. "Over here." Priscilla waved them down like she'd caught a fugitive. "That man tried to take a package off someone's porch. I saw the whole thing." Shaq stood still, hands by his side, nothing in them now but breath and patience. The older officer turned to him, eyes narrowing. Then the flicker of recognition. "Shaquille O'Neal?" he asked, not quite disbelief, but close. Shaq gave a tight nod. "Just doing yard work, sir." The younger one blinked. "Wait, you're Big Shaq? Like, the guy on TNT?" "Yeah," the older one added, cracking a half smile. "I thought you moved to Florida." "Mom lives here," Shaq said plainly. The energy shifted again, this time away from Priscilla, who stood dumbfounded, her mouth slightly open. The officer stepped aside and asked a few routine questions. They asked for IDs. Shaq provided his driver's license. He had nothing to hide. There were no charges, no crime, just a man moving a box. But the story didn't end there. A day later, the footage hit the internet. Not Priscilla's version, the edited accusatory one, but the raw footage from a neighbor's Ring camera. It showed the whole truth. Shaq walking calmly, picking up the box, placing it neatly back down. No theft, no attempt, just human decency mistaken for criminal intent. The video exploded. Comments poured in. Thousands. Then millions. Hashtags like Don Big Shaq Big Heart and Let Him Lift flooded social feeds. News anchors replayed the clip with commentary about racial profiling and the weaponization of neighborhood paranoia. Celebrities tweeted support. Athletes spoke out. Even Shaq's old teammate chimed in on national television. "They don't know the man. That man would carry your groceries, not steal your Amazon." But not everyone was cheering. Priscilla Vaughn's name leaked quickly. People connected the dots. Her voice, her porch, her accusations, her social profiles were flooded. Hate mail, messages. Her employer, a regional law firm, put her on administrative leave. Protesters camped outside her house for 2 days. She deleted everything, but the internet doesn't forget. Still, she never apologized. Not once. No statement. No remorse. Just silence. Curtains drawn tight. Porch light off for a week straight. And behind that silence, something else started to stir. Late one night, Lucille found a note in the mailbox. No stamp, no name, just words scribbled in sharp, fast handwriting. "Stay where you belong." Shaq read it once. Then again. He folded it in half and didn't tell his mom. Not yet. Because he knew something Priscilla didn't. Sometimes storms didn't break all at once. Sometimes they waited, lingered, gathered strength in the dark. And somewhere in that neighborhood, behind the lawns and the blinds, and the forced smiles, a second act was already loading. Because the box wasn't the only thing that had been left out in the open. So had the truth. And someone didn't like what the light had shown. The incident had passed, but the neighborhood hadn't settled. Not really. On the surface, Alabaster Lane went back to what it always was. Quiet, trimmed, scheduled. The lawn still got mowed on Thursdays. The mail still arrived at noon. Porch lights flickered on at sunset, almost like a ritual. But behind all that quiet, something lingered. Like a held breath. Like a gaze you couldn't quite place but felt anyway. Shaq had let the viral storm do what it did. He gave no press interviews, made no statements. He let the footage speak. And when the dust settled, he returned to doing what he did best. Showing up. He doubled his hours at the Westbridge Community Center, mentoring teens on weekends, hosting free workshops for young kids, interested in music, gaming, or just finding a way to keep their heads clear. He took 2 high school seniors on a college tour up to Atlanta, helped a local food truck secure city permits. Nothing flashy, just presence, a real kind of staying power. But at home, strange things started happening. The first note arrived, tucked neatly into his mailbox, wedged between a supermarket flyer and a church fundraiser invitation. The paper was plain, ruled, torn from a spiral-bound notebook, the kind you'd find in any kitchen drawer or middle school backpack. No envelope, no name, just 7 words, written in blocky all caps. Some people don't forget. Some watch. Shaq read it on the porch, the paper resting across his palm like something half alive. There were no threats, no slurs, no direct accusation. Just a suggestion. A whisper of something beneath the surface. He turned it over. Nothing on the back. No fingerprints visible. No obvious smudge of ink or hint of cologne. He didn't show Lucille. No need to worry her. He folded it twice and slid it into the pocket of his hoodie like it meant nothing. 2 days later, his garage door started acting strange. Sometimes it wouldn't close all the way, freezing halfway then jerking back up. Other times it would open on its own at night, creaking up just enough to make a statement. But never fully. He had a smart home system, so he checked the logs. Nothing irregular. No errors. No pings from unknown IPs. Still, the door kept doing its dance. A technician came out, replaced the motor. It kept happening. Then the lawn. One morning, just past sunrise, Shaq noticed a long, shallow scrape along the far edge of the grass near the garden. It wasn't wide, maybe 3 inches across, but it dragged in a half-moon pattern, like something heavy had been dragged, and then lifted. No footprints, no tire marks, just a curve in the earth where something had touched and gone. He asked Lucille if she saw anything. She shook her head, said the dog next door barked a little louder than usual, but she hadn't looked out. At first Shaq brushed it off. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe some neighborhood kid playing around. But the pattern appeared again 2 mornings later. In a different spot. Always at the edge. Always clean. The kind of thing someone did carefully. Like they wanted him to notice but not catch them in the act. He started keeping his outdoor lights on longer. Updated the camera system. Not out of fear. He wasn't scared. But he was aware now. Alert. In a different way. Not just of what was seen, but what was looking. In the middle of this quiet unraveling, something else shifted. A new car began parking outside Priscilla Vaughn's driveway. A dark gray Jeep, with blackout windows and a dent in the passenger side fender. It stayed parked late into the night and vanished early each morning, always before sunrise. Lucille mentioned it casually over breakfast. Said she saw someone tall get out one night. Hood up, shoulders hunched. They didn't go into Priscilla's house right away, just stood by the curb smoking and watching. Then one afternoon, Shaq saw him. He was outside cleaning the bird bath when the front door at Priscilla's place opened. A man stepped out. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Sharp cheekbones, buzzed hair, pale green eyes that didn't blink enough. He wore a hoodie, jeans, and a look that carried too much weight. Shaq knew the energy immediately. Displaced pride, restless bitterness. The kind of posture that said, "The world owes me something, even when the world didn't know your name." Lucille, sharp as ever, filled in the blanks over lunch. "That's Derek Vaughn," she said. like reading a weather report. Her son used to live in Austin. Some sort of tech job, quit or got fired. Something didn't work out. Been back 2 weeks now, keeps to himself, stares a lot. Shaq didn't say anything, but the puzzle pieces started to click. Derek wasn't just back, he was watching. Shaq could feel his eyes every time he walked outside, every time he took out the trash or waved to the mailman. There was no confrontation, no open challenge, just presence, a quiet hostility, the kind that doesn't bark or bite, just lingers long enough to wear down your peace. Then came the second note. This one was under his windshield wiper, folded tight and wedged beneath the blade, like a dare. Again, all caps, different paper this time, torn from a legal pad. You don't belong here. History repeats. Stay in your lane. Shaq crumpled the note and tossed it without reading it twice. But later he dug it out of the bin, smoothed it out, and photographed it. Not for fear, just documentation. Pattern recognition. He didn't tell Jordan Whitmore yet. The podcast journalist who'd been covering the original incident. She checked in weekly, hungry for any updates. But Shaq didn't want to feed her half a story. Not yet. Instead, he redirected his focus. That weekend, he hosted a block-wide cookout for the kids from the center: hot dogs, burgers, a rented bounce house that leaned a little too far to the left but didn't tip. Neighbors showed up. Not all, but enough. Marge brought lemonade. Mr. Rafferty brought silence but stayed 2 full hours. Kids played basketball in the driveway while Shaq refereed with exaggerated calls and goofy whistles. For a few hours, joy pushed back the fog. But Derek watched from the porch across the street. No plate, no smile, just those pale eyes and still shoulders, soaking everything in. That night, as the final grill coals dimmed and the last of the trash got tied off, Lucille handed Shaq a sealed envelope. It had no stamp, just their address, handwritten in uneven script. She said it slid through the front door during the cookout. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper. A photo. Shaq's face, taken from across the street, zoomed in and grainy, looking directly at the camera. Or maybe not. It was hard to tell. The timestamp in the corner read, 3:17 p.m., mid-cookout. He didn't remember facing any camera at that moment. No message, no note, just a picture. Shaq stared at it for a long time, then tucked it away in the back of his desk drawer. He didn't need to show Lucille. Didn't need to escalate. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about a package anymore. Something else was brewing. Something that didn't knock. Something that I watched. By midday, a new story had begun circulating. Not online, not in public, but in whispers and formal tone letters addressed to the HOA. Someone had submitted a complaint. A thickly worded concern over a public figure bringing unwanted attention to a historically quiet community. A veiled insult dressed in bureaucratic concern. The line that stood out, though, was brutal in its politeness. Mr. O'Neill's ongoing presence has a measurable negative impact on surrounding property values due to the media scrutiny and viral associations. Shaq read it twice. Then again, the file had been forwarded to him for awareness by a neighbor on the board who didn't sign their name, but added a note, "Watch your 6." It wasn't about property. That much was clear. This was about something older, deeper, nastier than real estate. Someone was trying to turn respectability into a weapon. Meanwhile, outside the community's gate, a different kind of scrutiny was gathering speed. Jordan Whitmore, host of the investigative podcast American Close-Up, had flown into Georgia 3 days ago. 36, fiercely observant, and never one to let a good lead go cold. Jordan had a reputation for cutting through polish and performance like acid through gloss. Her podcast had taken down an entire police district last year for falsifying testimony. She'd exposed a real estate scam in Jacksonville, revealed corruption in a Florida charter school board, and now, she was here. Because Alabaster Lane had a pattern, and it wasn't new. She reached out to Shaq quietly through one of the local youth coordinators at Westbridge. He agreed to meet. No fanfare, no handlers, just coffee and space. They sat under the gazebo near the walking path that snaked around the back of Lucille's cul-de-sac. Shaq in a gray crewneck, Jordan in boots and a black windbreaker with her podcast's logo barely visible. The air between them was weighty but open. "I went through your HOA records," she started without preamble. 16 complaints over the past 7 years were filed against residents of color. Most of them didn't even live here for more than 12 months. Shaq nodded. "How many against white residents?" 2, she said. One was for parking on the curb. The other was filed by Priscilla Vaughn, same woman who accused you, against a Latina woman who used to babysit down the street, claimed she was loitering during a smoke break. Shaq rubbed his jaw slowly. So this neighborhood doesn't have a racism problem. Just a filing cabinet full of ghosts. Jordan leaned in. The problem isn't the paper trail. It's what the trail avoids. There's a network here. Quiet, under the surface. People who know exactly how to look clean while doing dirty. He studied her for a beat. You think it's deliberate? I think someone's stirring up trouble with intent, she said, eyes sharp. The video made you a national figure for a week, but I think they were hoping for the opposite, a quiet humiliation, something that would push you out, not turn you into a symbol. The fact that it backfired, that's what's dangerous. Now they want to erase the damage, and you're the damage. Shaq glanced toward the row of houses, the neatly arranged symmetry of suburban safety. You ever see a neighborhood so manicured it hides where the blood flows? He asked quietly. She nodded. All the time. They parted without ceremony. Jordan promised to keep digging. Shaq offered nothing more than a short handshake, but the silence between them felt like the start of a storm front, too quiet to ignore. That evening, Lucille found a new envelope, tucked under the welcome mat. No stamp, just her name in tidy cursive. Inside was a typed memo, no letterhead, no signature, quoting a fabricated clause in the HOA charter, suggesting that long-term guests needed approval if they remained longer than 30 days. It wasn't real. Shaq had checked the real bylaws months ago, but the message was clear. They wanted him gone, and they were dressing the pressure in faux decorum. By the next morning, things escalated again. Not loudly, but with the same eerie intent. A notice appeared on Shaq's SUV windshield, claiming it was improperly parked too close to the sidewalk. The claim was false. He measured the distance himself. Then a neighbor 2 doors down, Carson Meeks, a thin man with a wireless earpiece always jammed in one ear, stopped him on his walk and offered an awkward smile. Hey, just between us, Carson said, feigning casual. Maybe it's time you think about giving your mom a break. These streets weren't really built for high-profile attention. Shaq didn't respond, didn't blink, just kept walking. But that night, as he sat on the back porch watching the tree line, he thought about the phrase Jordan had used. A network. Not a group, not a club, not an organization, a network. Loose, implicit, people who don't need to meet in secret or wear robes, just neighbors with sharp smiles and sharper pens, neighbors with teeth. It wasn't just Priscilla. She was the face of it, maybe, the voice, but someone else had been filing complaints. Someone else had left that note. Someone else had taken that photo. Derek Vaughn was a candidate, sure, but Derek wasn't slick. He had a chip on his shoulder and restless energy, but this game required patience, the kind of malice that simmers. Shaq began keeping a journal. Nothing fancy, just dates, times, oddities, a light flickering at the wrong hour, a car that drove by too slowly, a neighbor who stopped waving. He wasn't building a case. He was building clarity. A few days later, Jordan sent him a file through encrypted mail. Inside were PDF scans, archived complaint forms, typed minutes from HOA meetings that had gone off record, and one letter that made his stomach turn. A complaint dated 5 years earlier, against a guest who looked threatening, describing a man tall, black, wearing a hoodie. The resident had been staying with a relative. The letter was anonymous, but was marked approved for board review. The guest had left 2 weeks later. And the signature? An ID tag from the office of a real estate consultant firm, Vaughn Property Solutions. Shaq exhaled slowly. So the network had financial teeth too. He called Jordan that night and said 2 words. Let's go. No yelling, no lawsuits, no threats. But if someone wanted to dig up ghosts to lower property value, then maybe it was time to raise the price of the truth. The sun returned with a false sense of calm, laying itself across the rooftops like nothing strange had ever happened on Alabaster Lane. The birds resumed their songs, sprinklers came back on schedule, and neighbors walked their dogs as if the tension from days before had been packed neatly away. But Shaq knew better. The silence hadn't settled. It had sharpened, and it was waiting. It started with a knock on the door. Not the kind of knock you hear from a friendly neighbor or a delivery guy, but the stiff, deliberate rhythm of someone who comes with protocol. Lucille opened the door to find 2 officers standing there. Same uniforms, different faces. One held a tablet, The other carried a clipboard and a tightly forced smile. Behind them stood Priscilla Vaughn, chin lifted, lips pursed, her eyes darting between the officers and the flower bed like she was struggling to decide which deserved more of her disdain. "We received a report of stolen property," the taller officer said. "An Amazon package marked for 47 Alabaster. That's Miss Vaughn's address." Lucille folded her arms. "And you came to my house because—" "The package," the officer continued, "was found in your backyard." Shaq stepped out from the hallway, wiping his hands with a kitchen towel. "That's not possible," he said, calm but firm. "We'd like to take a look," the officer replied. "With your permission." Shaq led them through the house, past family photos, framed articles, and a silent television paused on a rerun of Inside the NBA. The back door creaked open, and there it was, sitting on top of the garden bench, nestled between a watering can and a half-dead rosemary plant. A small brown box, neatly taped, label face up, addressed to Priscilla Vaughn. He didn't touch it, neither did Lucille. The officer snapped a photo and bagged it. No fingerprints requested, no search of his property, just a quiet exchange of formalities and a warning that the incident was under internal review. Shaq watched them leave, Priscilla trailing like a dog walker holding a too-tight leash. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched with something unspoken. Not quite satisfied, not quite fearful, something in between. That night, the internet noticed. Not the whole world, not like before, but enough. A neighborhood gossip blog reposted the police report, which had somehow leaked online. A local tabloid, the Georgia Whisper, published a front-page article with the headline, "From MVP to UPS. Is Shaquille O'Neal crossing a line?" Inside, the tone wavered between mockery and suspicion. It quoted an unnamed community source who suggested that Shaq wasn't as neighborly as he seems, and speculated whether his celebrity lifestyle was bringing unwanted elements to their quiet cul-de-sac. Shaq read the article once, folded it in half, and slid it into a drawer. Not because he didn't care, because he cared enough not to feed it. But the tension bled in. At the community center, two parents pulled their kids from a weekend workshop until things blew over. A local bakery canceled their donation order, citing scheduling conflicts. Even one of the teens he'd mentored started acting distant, hesitant, like the wind had shifted and they weren't sure which direction to lean. Shaq didn't lash out. He didn't hold a press conference. He just kept showing up. But his steps felt heavier now, like someone had changed the gravity beneath him. Meanwhile, Jordan Whitmore was digging. The footage took 2 days to surface. A neighbor, someone who'd never even spoken to Shaq before, quietly handed over a Ring video file from their front porch. Jordan watched it 6 times before calling Shaq. "It's not you," she said. Shaq was in the backyard helping Lucille clean the grill. He wiped his hands, stepped away from the smoke, and pressed the phone tighter to his ear. "What do you mean?" "I've got a video of someone placing that package on your bench," Jordan said. "Night before the cops showed up. Guy's got your build. Wears the same hoodie, but the gait footage shows his gait is off. Left foot drags slightly. You don't walk like that. He's shorter too, maybe 2-3 inches, but from the right angle, could be close enough." Shaq exhaled. "You sure it's not doctored?" "I ran it through analysis software. It's clean. Raw footage. Someone's trying to look like you." Shaq sat down slowly on the porch steps, the kind his grandfather had built decades earlier. "Why?" Jordan's voice dropped. "That's the question, isn't it? Someone wants you out, but not just through HOA letters or public shame. They're escalating, carefully, calculated. You don't frame someone unless you want a narrative to stick." Shaq rubbed his face. "Someone like Derek? Could be. Could be someone paying Derek. Could be Priscilla. Could be someone behind Priscilla. I don't know yet. But this isn't just racism. It's orchestrated. Like a machine, cold and precise." That night, Shaq replayed the security footage Jordan sent, frame by frame. He watched the man enter through the side gate, crouch, place the box, glance once toward the camera, and leave. The hoodie looked like one Shaq owned, but it sagged differently. The way the man moved, stiff, rehearsed, made it clear this wasn't a random mistake. Someone had studied him, practiced, measured their performance not for a live audience, but for a frame. The next morning, Shaq walked to the front lawn and looked down the street at number 6. Priscilla's blinds twitched like they had a heartbeat. The Jeep was parked in the same spot, Derek's shadow visible in the upstairs window. The script was shifting. He wasn't just the target of suspicion. He was being written into something. A story that someone else was controlling, with props, costumes, and timing. But stories could change, especially when truth entered the frame. The white picket fences of Alabaster Lane didn't break or bend. They stood tall and proper, spaced evenly, like piano keys along a well-composed melody of domesticity. But behind those clean lines and garden gnomes, a dissonant note had started playing. Shaq felt it every time he walked past Priscilla Vaughn's perfectly clipped hedge, every time Derek's Jeep idled just a second too long at the end of the street. This wasn't about neighborly misunderstandings anymore. It was a performance, one with lighting, actors, and a quiet director pulling strings from shadows. Jordan had begun digging deeper the night after the second accusation. She didn't work with restraint when a story smelled rotten. She worked with urgency. Her instincts buzzed like static electricity as she backtracked Derek Vaughn's name through local tax records, shell LLCs, and domain registrations. What began as a suspicion turned into a revelation. Derek wasn't just Priscilla's reclusive son. He was the registered admin of a real estate news blog called Property Pulse South, an anonymously written site that had been quietly posting sensationalized crime reports, neighborhood watch alerts, and home value charts tied directly to racial profiling tags. The site looked like a DIY real estate newsletter at a glance, but its influence ran deeper. It was quietly referenced in HOA message boards, used in real estate agent mailers, and cited in public comment sections whenever city council met to discuss zoning or rezoning matters. Shaq stared at the screen in Jordan's car, parked a few blocks away from the cul-de-sac, watching the header of Derek's blog load over a weak hotspot connection. "What am I looking at?" he asked. Jordan tapped a post with a thumbnail of a shadowy figure blurred behind a tree. The headline read, "Unidentified individual loitering, crime surge brewing. This one went up the same week. Your first video went viral," she explained. "Notice the timestamp? It's dated 2 days before Priscilla called the cops on you the second time. But I wasn't even in town 2 days before that," Shaq said. "Exactly." She scrolled through more posts, each one subtly worded to imply fear without naming names. Rising concern, unusual traffic, transit activity. The words were vague enough to dodge liability, but the images were targeted. Always brown skin, hoodie, slouched postures captured in poor light. Jordan's fingers moved fast. She clicked into the back end of the site, which she'd gained access to through a common vulnerability in Derek's blog template, a lazy oversight on his part. "I've got logs," she said, posted drafts, photo edits, time-stamped uploads from an IP linked to their Wi-Fi router. Shaq leaned closer. "He's staging fear and monetizing it," she added. Click-through links go to a firm called Aegis Crescent Holdings. They specialize in low-cost property acquisition, especially in communities flagged as destabilized markets. Guess whose name is buried 3 levels down in the ownership paperwork? Shaq didn't speak. He didn't have to. "Priscilla Vaughn," Jordan said. "She's not just the angry neighbor. She's on the board of the holding firm. She and Derek have been manufacturing instability, false crime reports, fake accusations, targeted harassment, and buying out the houses that tank in value once fear sets in." Shaq sat back. The bigger picture was no longer blurry. The package, the false police calls, the slashed tires, none of it was random. It was part of a pattern, a strategy, but not the loud kind that makes national headlines. This was covert warfare, narrative manipulation. They weren't trying to push him out because of who he was. They were trying to erase people like him quietly, home by home, block by block. Jordan narrowed her eyes and opened a subfolder labeled scripts. Inside were PDF files titled with dates and initials. She opened one. It was a script, bullet-pointed statements, likely distributed to neighbors. If interviewed, say, "We've always valued safety and peaceful living here. Avoid race-specific language. Let implication do the work." If pressed, mention declining home value trends and cite Property Pulse South. Shaq let out a slow breath. "This is bigger than Alabaster. It's already hit 2 other neighborhoods in Marietta and Norcross," Jordan said. "Same firm, same tactics. I traced 3 separate evictions in the past year that followed identical community complaints, all against Black or Latino homeowners." Shaq's jaw tightened. This is gentrification with a ghostwriter. They agreed to go public. Jordan would draft a multi-episode exposé through her podcast platform, High-profile guests, cross-interviews, legal consultations, the whole thing. Shaq would remain the voice of lived experience. Not as a celebrity, as a witness, a man who chose not to leave. They set the release date 2 weeks out. Enough time to build buzz and gather a second source to verify the documentation Jordan had extracted. But 2 days before the first teaser was scheduled to drop, something cracked. Jordan returned to her hotel late from a city records office. She'd left her laptop in the hotel safe, one of those steel-cased drawers built into the wall. She entered the room, noticed nothing immediately out of place. No signs of forced entry, no missing cards, no broken locks, until she opened the safe. The laptop was gone. Not the camera gear, not the backup drives, just the laptop, the one with all the back-end access codes, her audio files, the metadata logs, the timestamp. She called Shaq in a voice tighter than he'd ever heard. Someone was watching me. Not just us. Me. They knew what to take. Shaq didn't panic. But something in him stiffened, like a rope pulled taut. Do we have backups? I've got some on the cloud, she said. But not all. The script files were local. The IP chain. The hosting records. All gone. Unless I can re-pull the data from his server. And you better believe he's scrubbing it now. Shaq went silent for a moment. The kind of silence that holds more weight than words. Then, we go analog. Use what we've got. Start recording interviews. Bring in live voices. This doesn't die here. Jordan paused, then agreed. We shift the format, make it personal, make it real. But both of them knew. The theft wasn't just a data grab. It was a message. They were being watched. Not with paranoia, with precision. Later that night, Shaq sat on his porch, staring out across the street at the white picket fences, now cast in gold by the porch lights. He saw movement in Priscilla's window. A figure pacing slowly. The curtain dipped once, revealing her silhouette. She stood still for a second, as if she knew he was looking. She turned off the light. Shaq leaned back in his chair, heart steady but fire lit. Because if they thought a missing laptop could bury the truth, they'd miscalculated something critical. He wasn't here to play hero. He was here to stand ground. And behind those perfect fences, he now knew exactly what kind of teeth were hiding. It didn't start with a headline. It started with a whisper. The kind that moves through cul-de-sacs and coffee shops like a breeze under closed doors. Gentle at first, almost harmless, but cold enough to signal change. By the time the local news caught it, the whisper had grown legs, found teeth, and wrapped itself around a dangerous word: threat. The segment ran just after the 6 o'clock weather update on Channel 8 News. Local woman alleges verbal threat from Shaquille O'Neal. The anchor didn't say it like a fact, but she didn't say it like fiction either. Her tone was careful, deliberate, the same tone used when bad news comes wrapped in corporate language. The footage was simple. Priscilla Vaughn, seated on her porch, wrapped in a beige cardigan, voice cracking just enough to seem credible. She told the reporter, he stood right there, just yards from my property line, and said, "You better watch yourself." I didn't feel safe. It was a lie. Every word of it. Shaq hadn't been anywhere near her yard that week. He'd been at the community center, mentoring kids, then with Lucille shopping for groceries. Jordan had timelines, records, even a time-stamped selfie with 3 students taken the exact hour. Priscilla claimed he made the threat, but none of that made the first wave of headlines. What made them was the soundbite, the image, the suggestion. It spread faster than truth ever could. By morning, local pundits were debating whether celebrities were too comfortable, thinking fame protected them. On national radio, a conservative host mused, "Just because you've got a smile and a fan base doesn't mean you're not intimidating. 7 feet of threat is still a threat." Talk show panels split down the middle. Online forums ignited. The phrase Shaq threat trended for 6 hours, piggybacked by memes, mock-ups, and a blurry screenshot of the false segment with Kisa Balham stamped across it. Shaq didn't flinch. He didn't post a video, didn't tweet. He went quiet, not out of guilt, but out of sheer measured exhaustion. They wanted a reaction. That was the game. Instead, he sat on Lucille's back porch that evening, eyes fixed on the shadows shifting across the yard, while his mother sliced carrots with methodical grace inside. The silence between them had its own language. Lucille knew her son didn't need fixing, just anchoring. "Don't let them rewrite you," she said without turning around. Shaq looked over. "They'll try," she continued, still working the knife. With whispers, with fear, with stories that suit their version of comfort. But you know who you are. We know who you are. Shaq nodded once. That was enough. The next morning, his team received an invitation from Good Morning America. National air, prime slot. They wanted to give him a platform to share his truth. But Shaq had been on enough stages to know the difference between a lifeline and a leash. He agreed. But on his terms. The studio was bright and pristine, the kind of place where every chair had a story, and every light was angled to flatter. The host welcomed him with a practiced smile, all warmth and timing. Cameras rolled, mics clipped. Shaq sat tall but still, his expression unreadable. The host opened with a soft toss. We know you're a man who believes in community, Shaquille. But this recent story, it's got people wondering, is there truth behind it? What's your side? Shaq stared at her for a moment. The silence stretched, and the room tensed. Then, calmly, he stood up. I'm not here to play your script, he said. The control booth scrambled. The host blinked. I've been followed, framed, lied on. And when I speak, you edit it down to what fits the headline. So here's my story. I stood up. I stayed. And I didn't leave when they wanted me gone. That's it. He removed the mic gently, placed it on the table, and walked off the set. The clip went viral within hours, but not for the reasons anyone expected. The walk-off became a symbol, a refusal, an unflinching pivot away from spectacle. That same night, Jordan disappeared, not literally. She just stopped answering emails, texts, and calls. Her online presence went dark. Shaq wasn't worried, not exactly. He knew the signs. She'd told him once, when the story's about to break open, I disappear to build it right. What no one knew, not even Shaq, was that Jordan had memorized the key data points before the laptop vanished. IP logs, server paths, edit history timelines. She had notebooks full of details, scribbled in shorthand only she could decipher. She went underground in a rented cabin 3 hours out from Atlanta. No signal, no distractions, just a whiteboard, a wind-up recorder, and her voice. She started rebuilding the narrative. Not just the tech trail, but the people. She called the tenants who'd been forced out. She hunted down the kids who'd filmed the false accusations. She traced scripts back to inboxes and names hidden behind P.O. boxes. Piece by piece, she reassembled what had been stolen. This time, not as a file but as a story. One that couldn't be hacked. One that couldn't be deleted. The exposé was no longer just data. It was testimony. Audio. Faces. Pain. And it was coming. But back on Alabaster Lane, the silence deepened. Priscilla stayed indoors more now. Derek's Jeep vanished for days at a time. The neighborhood, once so eager to whisper, now watched Shaq with a strange tension. Not guilt, not quite shame, something like uncertainty. The lie had echoed. But it was beginning to fade. Because sometimes the truth doesn't shout. It waits. And when it comes back, it doesn't knock. It walks in the front door. Uninvited, undeniable, and loud in all the right ways. The first sign was the smell, faint, acrid, too clean to be a grill, too sharp to be an accident. It was early morning, just after dawn, when Lucille stepped onto the back porch and froze. Thin trails of smoke curled like fingers through the rosemary bushes. A circle of black ash marked the edge of her garden bed, right where her hydrangeas once stood. The fire had burned low and fast, controlled, almost surgical. Not big enough to call 911, but deliberate enough to feel like a message. Shaq arrived home minutes later, coffee in hand, his mind already racing through the day's errands. Lucille met him with folded arms and eyes that didn't blink. She didn't speak until he saw it for himself. The scorched soil, the smell of carbon, the faint outline of a melted lighter half buried in the dirt. Somebody wanted us to notice, she said. Shaq crouched low, running his fingers along the outer edge of the burn. The pattern was tight, circular, not an accident, not a prank, a mark, and just above it, wedged into the porch slats, was a small strip of black fabric, hoodie material, torn at the seam. Shaq didn't need to ask whose. It was time. That evening, as the sun faded into a copper sky, a dusty blue sedan pulled into the cul-de-sac, unmarked, quiet, familiar, only to one person. Jordan Whitmore stepped out, wearing no makeup, a black hoodie pulled over her curls, and 2 spiral-bound notebooks tucked under her arm. She didn't greet with a hug or a smile. She just nodded. Let's talk. Inside, the kitchen table transformed into a war room. Jordan laid out sketches, files, handwritten transcripts, and a flash drive held together with cracked plastic and duct tape. Derek hired a digital impersonator from a marketplace forum, she began. Guy specializes in deep fake adjacent content. Close enough for facial match, especially at night or low angles. He wasn't building a fake version of you for entertainment. He was staging you for defamation. Shaq looked down at one of the printed frames. A tall man with similar build, same walk, same hoodie, caught just blurry enough to pass on first glance. He filmed him placing the package. Jordan continued, then uploaded it through a rotating IP address, and linked it to a citizen report filed anonymously through his blog portal. That's how he covered himself legally. He's not claiming truth, just reposting a public concern. And the actors? Shaq asked. Jordan flipped to a new page. Paid through cash apps, short-term contracts. They were told they were working on a student docuseries about neighborhood security. Most didn't know they were part of something malicious, but one, a guy named Neil Rhodes, messaged me last night after I tracked his alias. He confessed, said Derek directed the entire shoot like a film set. Gave line prompts like, "You look nervous, glance at the porch, then shake your head." Shaq leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. And the footage? Posted in 3 waves across multiple accounts, Jordan replied. All linked back to Property Pulse South, which as we now know is just a content feeder. The real endpoint is a buyer funnel for Arborbridge Equity Holdings. A real estate shell. She pulled up a spreadsheet. That company's mailing address is a UPS drop box 2 counties over. But the business license? Filed under a cosigner named Priscilla Vaughn. Lucille, standing at the counter, let out a low whistle. They've been selling fear like it's a feature. They profit when people like you, Jordan looked to Shaq, are made into threats. And when we leave, he said, they move in. Flip the property, sell the story of safety. Reclaimed. Jordan nodded. It's not new, but it's organized now. Weaponized. The room fell quiet. Then Shaq spoke, not loud, not angry, but grounded. I don't want revenge, he said. I want clarity. I want this exposed for what it is. Let the story burn brighter than their lies. Jordan slid the flash drive forward. This is everything. Footage, statements, account transfers, shell ownerships. It's not just a podcast anymore. It's a full-blown media investigation. I've already partnered with 3 outlets. The story goes wide by Friday. Front page. National eyes. Lucille turned from the counter, placing a tray of warm cornbread on the table like it was part of the planning. Then we better feed the truth right, she said. Let it travel full and fast. They all sat down, not to celebrate, but to plan. By morning, the pieces were in motion. Jordan met with 2 journalists from The Atlantic and Reveal. They cross-referenced her files, confirmed sources, and started mapping timelines. Jordan's podcast episode, titled Constructed Fear, The Gentrification Playbook, would launch in tandem with the articles. The voiceover was raw, unedited, just Jordan narrating the truth like it had been scratched into her bones. Meanwhile, Shaq took a quieter path. He returned to Westbridge. Not to hide, but to stand. He walked through the basketball gym, where kids stopped mid-drill to hug him. He sat down in a circle of teens, opened his notebook, and told them what was happening. Not the celebrity version, but the real one. The fear, the manipulation, the fight. They want to tell a story about us without us, he said. We don't let them. Back on Alabaster Lane, tension rose again. The day before the expose was set to release, a white SUV drove slowly past Lucille's house 3 times. No plates, tinted windows. Then that night, someone tried to reset the Wi-Fi router from outside. The firewall held, but the message was clear. They knew the story was coming. Shaq sat in the living room, watching the camera feed loop across his phone. Calm. Ready. I'm not moving, he said aloud. Not one step. The next morning, Jordan texted one word. Live. At 9:03 a.m., the podcast dropped. At 9:05, the articles went live. By 10:10, The Daily Show posted a segment. By noon, Gentrification Gate was trending. People started asking questions. Who's behind Arborbridge? How many homes were lost? Why was Derek Vaughn's name listed as media consultant on 3 different neighborhood sites? The fire had been quiet before. Controlled. Now it was lit from every side. But this time the only thing burning was the lie. It started not with an explosion, but a ripple, a single wave on a digital ocean that spread without warning and surged without apology. At 8:00 a.m., on a quiet Thursday, Jordan Whitmore hit publish on what she simply titled The Vaughn Tape, a 41-minute audio-visual exposé, raw interviews, data logs, forged complaint templates, voiceover transcripts, even recorded calls where actors admitted to being coached on what to say and how to sound. The video wasn't polished, it wasn't slick, it was deliberate, honest, uneasy, the kind of story that didn't ask to be believed. It dared the audience not to. Within the first 2 hours, it hit 500,000 views. By noon it passed 2 million. By the end of the day, it became the story. Jordan didn't narrate the video like a journalist. She spoke like a neighbor, a witness, a woman who'd seen power manipulated and weaponized under the cover of civic order. She showed the blog Derek ran, how the language subtly triggered fear. She pulled up metadata proving the footage was doctored, how the timecodes were faked, and the angles selected to mimic racial tropes. Then she cut to the actors, blurred faces, disguised voices, confessing how they were coached to behave nervous, to whisper terms like uncomfortable, and unsafe near homes like Shaq's. She didn't name Priscilla right away. She built to her, frame by frame, connecting her to Arbor Bridge Holdings through 3 shell companies, tax filings, and a deed trail. It ended with a zoom-in on the homeowner ledger from Alabaster Lane, with her signature in bold. The nation paused, and then it erupted. It wasn't outrage for the sake of trending. It was specific, focused. Activists shared the link with hashtags like Blanted Fear and Justice on the Curb. Celebrities reposted, not just because Shaq was involved, but because it tapped into something deeper, a pattern everyone had seen but few had named with receipts. By 3 p.m., the New York Times picked it up. By 4:20, CNN had Jordan live on air via remote, where she outlined the fraud with the poise of someone who had fought for every word she printed. Meanwhile, on the ground in Georgia, the air began to shift. Westbridge Community Center overflowed. Dozens of kids, mentors, parents, and local allies poured in, not angry, not afraid, mobilized. They made signs, wrote statements, organized calls to local officials demanding the revocation of business licenses tied to Arbor Bridge. But the protests didn't take to the streets in chaos. They lined the sidewalks in silence, arms linked, holding up signs that read, "Erase the lies, not the people." At City Hall, press lined the steps. Questions flew like arrows toward county officials, board members, and anyone who had ever signed a single Vaughn-affiliated approval. A councilwoman released a statement calling for an immediate investigation into the HOA's complaint processes and a full audit of all reports connected to racial profiling. Within 24 hours, 2 real estate sponsors cut ties with Derek's firm. By 48, Arbor Bridge Holdings site was offline. But the fallout wasn't confined to institutions. On Alabaster Lane, Priscilla Vaughn's blinds stayed closed. The white picket fence looked less like a boundary and more like a barricade. The mailbox sagged at an odd angle. Her porch, once pristine, now bore the stain of paint. A single word, scrawled in shaky black handwriting: shame. It wasn't a protester's work. It came in the middle of the night, not with chanting or flashlights, but with quiet rage. Not mob fury, just personal betrayal. Shaq didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He watched from the porch, a silent figure in sweats and house shoes, watching a structure crack from within. He saw the tension, felt the way the neighborhood tiptoed past his house, with hesitant nods and averted eyes. The same people who once whispered, now offered timid waves. Some even crossed the street. Mrs. Delaney, the hummingbird widow, with the rocking chair, brought over banana bread without a word. She didn't explain, didn't confess, just placed it on the step, and said, "Still warm." Mr. Rafferty mowed his own lawn for the first time in months, and stopped halfway to tell Shaq, "My daughter saw the story, said to tell you, sorry." Change didn't come as an apology. It came in fragments. Small acknowledgements, open hands. The resistance wasn't gone. It had just lost its grip. But for Shaq, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about reclaiming truth. So when Jordan invited him to speak at the Westbridge Youth Rally 2 days later, he said yes, not for him, but for the kids who needed to know how to stand still when the world spins. The rally was held in the gymnasium, packed shoulder to shoulder, no air conditioning, just the heat of movement, breath, and belief. Jordan introduced him simply. "You know who he is. But maybe today, you'll learn why he stayed. Shaq stepped up. No script, no cue cards. Just his voice, deeper than speakers could hold, filled with weight and peace. They tried to bury me in the lie, he said, looking out at the faces. Brown, black, white blended, expectant. But I'm still here. The room stayed silent, not out of awe, out of listening. I didn't move out, he continued, because I wasn't the problem. I didn't stay to prove anything. I stayed because the truth doesn't leave when it's uncomfortable. It stays. It waits. It watches. And then it speaks. He looked down for a beat, then backed up. You don't fight a lie by yelling louder. You fight it by living louder. When he finished, no one clapped right away. They just stood. Some nodded. Some cried. A few raised their hands. Then the applause came. Not like a roar, but a slow build, like the first few drops of rain before a flood. In the weeks that followed, Alabaster Lane changed. Not overnight, but gradually. Priscilla put her house up for sale, quietly. No sign, just a moving truck that came before sunrise. Derek's Jeep disappeared. The blog went offline permanently, but more telling were the new faces. Families of every shade began moving in. The kind who came with kids, with hope, with no need for fences to feel safe. They waved when they passed. They asked Lucille about her pie recipe. They asked Shaq about college tours. They didn't whisper. They introduced themselves. One afternoon, Shaq stood on the porch watching a little girl ride her bike down the sidewalk. Streamers fluttering behind her like the tail of a kite. Her father jogged alongside her, laughing, winded. They waved. He waved back. Lucille appeared at the door, wiping her hands. Peace looks good on this street, she said. Shaq nodded. Takes time, but it stays when it's earned. She smiled. Still want cornbread? Always. He stepped inside, leaving the door open behind him. Because for the first time in a long while, nothing needed locking. The wind had changed. Not in temperature, but in tone. For the first time in a long time, the breeze on Alabaster Lane carried laughter, not whispers. It moved freely now, rustling leaves instead of suspicion, winding through picket fences, like it belonged there. Peace had returned, not the fragile kind that pretends all is well, but the earned kind, the kind built from truth that had refused to leave. Shaq sat on the front porch, just like he had the very first morning this all began. The same old creaking rocker beneath him, Lucille's voice humming faintly from the kitchen, as she tended to a peach cobbler that had already filled the house with warmth. The sky stretched wide and cloudless. Children's voices echoed from the next yard over. New neighbors, a couple from Pittsburgh, whose twins had already claimed the sidewalk as a racing track. Their giggles bounced with each spin of their training wheel. Jordan had launched her new podcast just 3 days ago, Framed, but Standing. In the first episode, she recounted the entire Alabaster Lane story, not as an expose but as a lesson in quiet resistance. She'd framed the episode around one word: present. How standing your ground physically, morally, silently, can be the sharpest response to injustice. It was already charting in the top 10, and in every interview she gave, she made it clear, this story wasn't hers alone, it was shared. Shaq hadn't done much talking since the story broke. He let the work speak. He still showed up at the center, still sat with teens who needed a sounding board, still helped carry groceries for older neighbors who'd once doubted him. He didn't hold it against them. They hadn't just believed lies, they'd been trained by them. This morning Lucille had told him, the ground remembers who walks it with care. He'd smiled at that. And now, with the breeze wrapping around his legs, a glass of cold sweet tea sweating beside him, he felt its stillness. Not silence, stillness. And then came the knock. Not loud, not frantic. 3 even taps, soft, deliberate, the kind that didn't demand attention but asked for it. Shaq rose slowly. He didn't need to check the camera feed. He already knew. He opened the door. There she was, Priscilla Vaughn, standing in the same beige slacks, though more wrinkled now, a gray coat over her shoulders, despite the warmth, and her hair pulled back tightly, as if she were trying to hold something inside. Her eyes didn't rise past his chest. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear but with effort to hold a posture she no longer believed in. She didn't say a word, just extended her hand. In it, a plain white envelope. Shaq took it gently. Their fingers didn't touch. She stood there one more beat, as if the air between them owed her something. Or maybe she was offering something the moment hadn't yet accepted. Then she turned, walked back down the steps. No words, no glance back. Shaq closed the door and opened the envelope. Inside, two things. First, a handwritten letter, barely half a page. I was wrong. Not just about the package, about everything. I saw what I wanted to see because I was taught to. I profited from that. I let fear shape facts. I let control become cruelty.
I can't fix what I did.
But I can leave it behind. This belongs to you now. Maybe not the house, but the place. The peace. Keep it better than I did. Priscilla. The second item, a deed. Signed over. Full transfer. Her house handed to a non-profit housing trust Jordan and Shaq had helped form in the aftermath. No profit. No payout. Just left behind. Shaq read both twice. Then he folded them. Placed them on the entryway table beside the photo of his father holding him as a boy. And he walked back to the porch. Lucille appeared in the doorway a moment later, drying her hands on a dish towel. Who do I think it was? She asked. Shaq nodded once. She finally found the courage to leave. He nodded again. Lucille stepped forward, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You didn't need to win. You just needed to laugh. I didn't even need to fight, Shaq said. Just stand. Lucille looked out at the street. The kids still racing. A new couple planting tulips in a yard that once held only suspicion. Sometimes standing is the fight. They sat together then, in a shared quiet. The wind moved past them, not burdened, not warning, just moving. And behind them, the door stayed open, not wide, but enough. Because this wasn't a victory, it was the beginning. If this story hit something real, don't scroll past it. Share it at the dinner table, not just online. Speak up in rooms where silence used to win. Look twice before you judge once. And the next time someone tries to rewrite the truth, make sure you're standing on the page that can't be erased.